Today in my driveway, I have the new 2022 Rivian R1T and the new Ford F-150 Lightning. Let's take a look at why you might want one truck over the other, some of the features that are cool, some of the features that I think are a little bit unusual on either of these two new electric trucks. Rivian is an all-electric startup, and I would argue that the R1T is not just an all-electric truck, it's also the only luxury truck currently on sale in the US. Everything about the Rivian exudes attention to detail, like all of the accents inside these full LED headlight modules, the accents inside this light bar. It might be a little bit difficult to see on camera. Definitely a really elegantly designed truck. I like the front end. I know it's been a bit divisive with these oval headlights, but I really like the look. Over here in the Ford F-150, it is an electric interpretation of a regular F-150. So a lot of the design components are very similar, but we do have this LED bar running right across the top. The lighting in this bar is not as even as the one in the Rivian. You can see there's kind of a dark spot right there. It's still very attractive. It's definitely a cool look. I like the light bar, but it doesn't have the sense of pizzazz and finesse that we find, I guess you'd say, in the Rivian. We also don't have LED fog lights, a bit of a surprise. Now, we do have some things that traditional truck owners might be interested in, like metal bumpers up front. In the Rivian, there's metal going on underneath, but front and rear, all the bumpers are plastic. Oddly enough, we have the same tire width on either of these vehicles. We have 21-inch wheels over here in the Rivian. I chose those because they're the most aerodynamic wheel available, and they still have their aero covers on. Over here in this Platinum, we have 22-inch wheels, but the tires are 275 width on both models. You'll definitely notice that the cab in the Lightning is bigger. Lightning only comes one way. Ford's biggest cab, basically the same dimensions as a traditional F-150 with the big cab, short bed. The hood is basically the same as every other 150. Over in the Rivian, we have some pretty unusual dimensions, and these are important to keep in mind. In terms of absolute vehicle width, the Rivian is about the same size as the F-150 Lightning. And if I come around to this angle, you can see what's going on. We have this pretty eccentric curve out right there. So you can see the greenhouse, this upper section of the roofline, that's about the same size as a Toyota Tacoma. But as it comes down around the vehicle, the Rivian gets wider, just about as wide as the F-150. The F-150, on the other hand, is pretty vertical on the side. And even though we have just a little bit of a bump out, the interior dimensions that are critical, shoulder room, so right around here, and hip room right around there in the cab, that's about 6 inches wider than the Rivian. Also, the Rivian has a smaller rear compartment. So in terms of rear seat area, this is a bit more like a mid-size crossover, something along those lines, than the average half-ton truck in America. And if I open the door, you'll notice that we have a little bit of a different seating position as well. The seats are higher off the ground, a little bit more of a stadium seating vibe, giving you less headroom in the back than we find in the F-150. Part of the reason the seats are up a little bit is because of the way the drivetrain is arranged here, and their desire to give us extra storage space. So right here we have a gear tunnel, which makes use of space normally wasted in the average truck. If I pan over here to the F-150 quickly, you'll notice that we have a pretty vertical line there. We have a separate bed from the cab. That's important because most body-on-frame trucks are like this. Cab, bed, frame below. Inside the F-150's cabin, you'll notice that the rear seats are not vertical like a medieval church pew, and that results in some wasted space behind. Of course, Ford gives us some of that back because you can move that seat bottom cushion up, and that collapses that seat forward, giving you this really large area in here where you could put some larger items, definitely larger than in the Rivian. We also have a larger under-seat storage area, and this can collapse into the floor if you'd rather have more of a flat-style load floor. Over here in the Rivian, again, a bit more of a crossover vibe with the seat bottom cushion that flips forward like that because there's nowhere else for it to go to give us access to a smaller storage area that is not collapsible. We then have the subwoofer over here behind the passenger seat. But if you're looking for lockable storage, you will find that in this gear tunnel, and you could put sets of golf clubs in there. I was even able to fit cases of wine in there. The opening is large enough. You can see it's not quite rectangular. It does have kind of an awkward slant right there, so that will limit the kinds of things you can put in there, but you could certainly put 22-inch roller bags. You could stuff duffel bags in there, golf clubs, lots of things like that. And even some wider items than would normally fit in the cab because this is the widest section of the Rivian. Although you notice you don't get access to the entire width, You'll see that's cut in right there because over here we have a small storage cubby integrated into this little door. When it comes to cargo beds, we find a pretty traditional one in the F-150. On the inside, this is exactly the same as a regular F-150. You can see the child seats back there that we use for child seat testing here on the channel. But over here in the Rivian, we have a bed that is in some ways more like a mid-sized truck and in some ways more like a full-sized truck. We have a power tonneau cover that's available. I really wonder how long this is going to last. I have had just a few glitches with this already. It seems like stuff can get stuck back there as this is collapsing in. I have certainly seen leaves get sucked in there and they don't come out. I'm not sure exactly where they go. At any rate, the dimension that's interesting in this bed is the wheel well to wheel well dimension. It is just as wide as the dimension that we find in the F-150. Quite logical because the tracks, the distance between the two wheels, is actually really similar F-150 to Rivian. Of course, the rest of the bed dimensions, those are different. And this is a composite bed, so plastic right here. The button to release the bed is right down there. That then pops down. Then we have this interesting little ramp to help you get cargo from one side of the tailgate to the other. Over here we have a release to pop up this extra storage compartment or spare tire holder if you opt for the spare tire. It is optional in the Rivian. Over here on this side we find an air compressor that taps into the built-in air suspension system that we find in the Rivian. It lets you fill your own tires, trailer tires, whatever, and it automatically adjusts the pressure. So you set the pressure on this, connect the hose, and then it's just gonna fill the tire up till it reaches the right set pressure. Over here on this side of the bay, we find two electrical outlets for the onboard inverter. The onboard inverter in the R1T appears to be rated for about 1800 or perhaps 1900 watts. Some of those higher draw tools you cannot run with the onboard inverter in this. In the Lightning, things are a little bit more interesting. Let's talk about the tailgate first. However, if I lower this, you'll notice pretty traditional tailgate. It's also power up and power down. We have that gap right there that we don't find in the Rivian R1T, but that's going to mean that things are going to be easier to clean because stuff will actually fall through there and they will clear the tailgate. You can actually get things like gravel or sand out of there. Over here we have the electrical connections. So two different inverters on board, a 7.2 kW inverter, and then there's a 2.4 kW inverter as well. And then over here on the tailgate, we have Ford's same integrated step. Something that we interestingly don't find in the Rivian. I have to say it is a lot easier to hop into the back of the F-150 because we have a pretty traditional bumper right there where you, I guess, would normally put a bumper ball, but we don't have that here because we have a built-in receiver. And then little molded step grips right there on the rest of the bumper. Over here in the Rivian, we don't have any corollary to that for getting into the back, although you can use the gear tunnel for this. If I pop this open, one complaint here, no handle, so you do have to kind of claw to get that open. Then you can use this as a step, then you can hop up into the truck, but this is a much taller leap than into the F-150. Both vehicles have a power opening and power closing front trunk, but you can see that the implementation of the front trunk is definitely different. Over here in the Rivian, it kind of is like a 1970s sedan trunk where we have a definite lid and then a cargo well. This cargo area is definitely smaller than the one in the Lightning, but it is a bit squarer. And in terms of width, it is exactly the same width as the one in the Lightning. If I go down here, you can lift up this floor section. It will then magnetically hold into place right there and allow you access to the entire storage area. You can also pull it out if you want to, and this can be used as a cooler. There's a drain down there at the bottom. This is where Rivian puts their EVSE. There's a little cargo net right there for holding additional cargo. And you can see up there we have that big Rivian logo. Over here in the Ford, also big Ford logo. It's actually a little bit bigger right there on the hood. But because the Ford F-150 is bigger and squarer up front, and Ford did not change the front end design of the Rivian, they were able to give it all the space normally allotted to a 5-liter V8 essentially. So about 14 cubic feet in here, 3 cubic feet more than we find in the Rivian. Under that lid we find 4 120 volt outlets and some USB charge only ports. Hooks for cargo there, cargo net, and yes, even some underfloor storage in here. You can see the floor is rated for 400 pounds up front, and that's where we find the drain if you want to use this area as a cooler. Although I have to say, for using the front end as a cooler, the Rivian's tub design makes a little bit more sense to me. Let's talk about the interior design now. We have a large touchscreen infotainment system and a pretty large non-touchscreen instrument cluster over here for the driver. You can see it has moving map data right there, a little image of the car. The display does change whether we're in the drive mode, etc. We get things like the parking sensors around the vehicle. A little warning there telling me that gear tunnel is open. It's not going to want me to drive away right now with that. Over here we have a touchscreen system that does not support Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, none of that, but it does have built-in Amazon Alexa if you're interested. One thing that I dislike about this system is the air vent arrangement. These are very Tesla-like in the way that you have to move them around on the screen, but it's really difficult to get an ideal position for the air vent, I discovered. Sometimes it's too far away. If you really like air being focused on your face, you're probably not going to like these air vents. But if you prefer something a bit more diffuse, this is probably going to be just fine. On the lower left corner of the screen, we have a shortcut for the ventilated seat. It would also shortcut for the heated seat if you've used that as a recent option. We then have the defogger and defroster there. Map display like that with live map data, which is really kind of a nice touch. It gives you traffic information. It gives you Google satellite imagery, which is really cool. You can also get current up-to-date status on charging network availability. So if I just choose all networks there and I just want available stations and I don't care maybe how fast they are, maybe I'll include all of them, then you can see which stations are available and easily navigate to them. And if you program one of these into the vehicle, for instance that as a destination, it is going to start conditioning the battery for DC fast charging, something that we don't find in the Lightning, but we do find in modern Teslas. Over here on the music interface, this is very Tesla-like. We have streaming audio only, we have Spotify, we have TuneIn, we have Bluetooth audio, and then we have just FM radio. So if you're interested in satellite radio, you're going to need to look elsewhere. Over on the car option sheet, that's where we find things like our trip computer readouts, some vehicle settings and controls. You can open and close the hood, open the gear tunnels, etc., close the tonneau cover. It says object detected, probably one of the leaves that it sucked in and has just sort of frozen there. Over here we have options for lights, things like that. We can then change vehicle options over there on that gear icon, but not as many options are adjustable as you might think for a very tech-focused vehicle. Under the three dots, we have some additional options, things like the camera system, the gear guard option. That's the sort of security guard camera-like thing that we find in here. Think of it as Ring camera for your car. Phone interface, more settings there, same thing that we had before. An energy screen where you can see what your range would be based on your different drive modes. So if I put it in conserve, 117 right now. That's based on my current driving history with the 21-inch road wheels. This is also where you can adjust the charge limit. Rivian is recommending that you are daily charging only to 70%, so keep that in mind with the range calculation. On the left side, we have a garage door opener shortcut, that Amazon shortcut right there, and notification shortcut. If I click on this option here, this is how we would adjust our steering wheel side mirrors and deal with the memory system. This is the lock and unlock button for the vehicle. The main thing you'll notice with the Rivian's interior is how elegant and luxurious this is. We have things like the imitation suede headliner, extra piping and details on those leather handles right there, this large panoramic moonroof, gold accents on the headrests, things like that, lots of different stitching styles. Definitely a very design-forward seat right there, ventilated seats, contrasting piping, contrasting fabric inserts there. Tons and tons of real wood trim and ambient lighting as well. You can barely see the ambient lighting inside that little strip right there that goes around that wood strip around the door. Lots of really nicely done wood trim on the dashboard, but oddly enough, no glove box at all in the Rivian. Lots of stitched materials on the upper section of the dashboard. You can see that large speaker grill that runs right across the top. There's that large LCD instrument cluster there. Everything is really finished nicely, including the buttons on the steering wheel, trim there, wood trim. Very button minimalist interior here like we find in modern Teslas, so these buttons do double duty for a variety of different things. These are going to adjust the steering wheel. They're also going to adjust your side view mirrors. This one becomes the right side mirror adjustment. That one becomes the left side mirror adjustment. This one also functions as your trailer brake controller. And when cruise control is activated, it also adjusts the distance and the speed of your cruise control. Over here, we have a volume knob, and it also functions as a few other features depending on the system drive mode. Back here, we have a stalk that contains our headlight controls as well as the windshield wipers. And then on that side, we have the shifter. This also doubles to enable the cruise control. You click down for regular cruise control or adaptive cruise control, depending on your drive mode, and you double tap down for the more aggressive lane centering system. There is a promise in the future of a semi-autonomous hands-free driving system. We don't have that just yet. As you'd expect in a skateboard-style EV, we have a pretty flat floor right there for the driver and front passenger. They've used this for a large storage area. We keep bags, purses, things like that. We then have a removable camp speaker that's kind of a cool touch. It pairs with your Bluetooth system and then charges from the vehicle, locks right back into place. We then have cup holders that pop out from that area. I'm not the biggest fan of pop-out cup holders. I do prefer something a little bit different, but these are pretty large and they appear to be pretty sturdy. There's a big bar down there at the bottom to hold some of those drinks, but things like juice boxes, things like that, those might have a problem in that. Over here we have a Qi wireless charging mat. It is a little difficult to locate your phone on that mat. Then we have a slot so that we can keep your smartphone in that position. We then have a bifold center armrest. You'll notice that this is definitely narrower across than we find in a half-ton truck. It is a little bit more similar to a mid-size truck. On longer trips, I find the Rivian seats to generally be more comfortable than the F-150 seat, although these do not support the anti-fatigue massage that we do find in the top-end F-150. We have a 4-way lumbar support, power seat controls over here, and identical range of motion in the driver and front passenger seat. Moving back here to the rear passenger area, we find the same level of attention to detail as we found in the front. Big Rivian logo right there, suede headliner on those pillars. Lots of soft touch materials and real wood trim back here on the rear doors as well. Lots of cool texturing on things also. Wood insert right back here on the rear of the front seats. USB charge only port there and a little coat hanger. Lots of attention to detail, as I said before. Color contrasting things, little storage areas there. Big LCD right here for the rear climate control. Back here we find the only traditional air vents in the vehicle. I really wish those had been the standard up front. Then 2 USB charge only ports down below. You can see plenty of leg room back here for me at 6 feet tall with this front seat adjusted for me. However, definitely not as much room as you'd find in the F-150 Lightning. Over in the Lightning, we have just a regular old F-150 that happens to be electric. So everything that you would find in a regular F-150 Platinum we find in here, including this large panoramic moonroof. This one does open, unlike the one in the Rivian, and it has a shade that closes it completely off, which is definitely my preference. Things can get a little hot in the sun. Speakers right there on the ceiling, speakers on the door, but a lot less attention to detail, more hard plastics in here, very plain headliners, etc. Keep in mind that this Lightning is actually a little bit more expensive than that Rivian. We have the optional Bang & Olufsen sound system in this particular model, so we have headrest speakers. Like the Rivian, the seats are heated and ventilated, but unlike the Rivian, we have an adjustable shoulder section, and we have the anti-fatigue massage functionality. No real wood trim in this Platinum model. We do have a little bit of a faux suede insert right there on the door, and then some imitation wood trim just above it, but lots and lots of storage in the F-150. So we have 2 tiers of storage right there in the doors. Then we have not 1, but 2 glove compartments. One up here that's sort of a slot style. Rivian could probably have done something like that. And then down here, more of a traditional bin style glove compartment. Definitely more storage space going on. Things are also a little bit more industrial as far as the design of the dash. Harder plastics above, but we do have some stitched material in the Platinum model. Over here, we have the driver monitoring system for the Blue Cruise semi-autonomous hands-free driving system. We then have the Pro Trailer backup assist knob, so you can steer the trailer backwards. Engine start, stop button, definitely different than the Rivian. In the Rivian, you just hop in, put your foot on the brake and go. We have our integrated trailer brake controller here, and then we have the large touchscreen infotainment system. This has basically been ripped right out of the Ford Mustang Mach-E, and they didn't change the software or the hardware that much for the Lightning. Hardware is kind of a big thing because you can see some of the transitions, they're not as snappy, and you will really notice that when you first start up the vehicle, that sometimes the system can feel a little bit sluggish. But there is so much more to do in this system than you can do in the Rivian. And because of that, I'm only going to go over a few things. Camera views are definitely different in this vehicle, as I've mentioned in some of the other videos. We get more of a top-down view of the hitch, which is really handy if you're backing up to something. That's really a sort of bird's eye view from the back. This vehicle has a traditional locking differential in the rear. Some people might be more interested in that. We have lots of lighting options as well. You can light up the exterior of the vehicle. There are lights around that you can turn on and off. So for instance, if I just turn that on, I can turn the lights over here on and off with the vehicle. We also have the Pro Power onboard system. You can control the inverters in the cab, in the front trunk, and in the bed, and then you can see exactly what they're up to. We don't have that same kind of visibility in the Rivian, so there's really no way to know exactly what those inverters are up to. The intelligent backup power, that's a different option that allows you to power your home from the vehicle. It does not use the onboard inverters. The onboard scales thing, that is a really cool feature. So when the vehicle is in parked, you can see exactly how much weight is in the vehicle. Down below we have the climate controls there, physical volume knob, which is kind of a cool touch, although that is just a touch thingy right on top of the screen. It's a little bit difficult in this lighting to show you, but down below that we have some additional physical buttons for things. We then have a bin where you can put your smartphone, 2 USB inputs. We have a little door that covers that with imitation wood there. One interesting, cool touch in here that we've seen in F-150s for a while, not just electric ones, is this powered shifter that allows us to then open this center console in the reverse way and use this as a laptop table. I found that really handy while DC fast charging. I'm surprised that no other EV has imitated that. Then on the inside, we find a much larger and deeper storage well. You can put letter-sized hanging files in here. There are also some additional USB charge ports. And you'll notice that the center armrest is definitely wider because the entire cabin in here is wider. On the driver's side, we also have a full LCD instrument cluster. It's set back in the dash a bit more, and I don't think it's quite as snazzy looking as the one in the Rivian, but we do have some information that's kind of cool, like power balance, front and rear for those electric motors. We don't find a similar screen on the Rivian. It's kind of nice to see exactly what the motors are up to. Over on this side, we have a blended braking gauge because this does have a blended braking system. If you want to maximize your regen, where it appears that the Lightning is actually capable of a bit more regen than we find in the Rivian, you're going to have to feather your foot on the brake pedal, because when you engage the brake pedal, you're actually going to be regenerating more power into the battery. And on the Rivian, when you put your foot on the brake pedal, all you get is friction braking. Moving out from there, we find a pretty typical Ford truck steering wheel. Controls for the adaptive cruise control over here on this side. Lots and lots of buttons here. Volume up, down, track forward, backward, then the controls to that multifunction LCD cluster. Just lots of buttons all the way around in here. So obviously memory buttons for the seats are over here, buttons for the headlights, the side lights, you can turn the lights in the side view mirrors on and off, dedicated buttons for the tailgate, the front trunk, power adjustable pedals, which may be important for people that are a little bit shorter or a little bit taller. Over a week of driving, I found these seats to be intrinsically a little bit less comfortable than the ones in the Rivian, but I really like the anti-fatigue massage functionality. When that's engaged and you're on a longer road trip, I do find them a little bit more comfortable. It definitely helps improve the circulation. Jumping into the F-150, there's a little bit less of a stadium seating vibe, and I have about the same kind of headroom that I find in the F-150 if you opt for this power moonroof. If you don't get it, then you're going to get more headroom back here. When it comes to legroom, however, there is definitely more going on in the F-150. This front seat is actually further back than I would normally sit because I was filming in the vehicle. I still have gobs and gobs of legroom left. Significantly more legroom than we find in the Rivian, and a significantly wider bench and wider floor area. Okay, we haven't talked about what makes these trucks go, so let's dive into that now. For a modern EV, the Rivian has an unusual setup. It has 4 electric motors, not just 2. And that's part of how it gets to the 835 horsepower, 908 pound-feet of torque, and 3.2 second 0 to 60 time, despite being heavier than the F-150. The F-150 is pretty respectable, 580 horsepower, 775 pound-feet of torque, and a 0 to 60 time of a more leisurely 4.3, but these are still the 2 fastest trucks on sale in America. They're also the 2 best handling trucks in America. Likely due to its lower center of gravity, the Rivian is the better handling option here. These 2 vehicles again have pretty similar tire sizes, but the Rivian definitely feels more nimble out on the road. The air suspension gives it a different feel than we find in the Ford, but both of these trucks are tuned towards the softer side of things. Ride quality is fairly equal in most of the drive modes, but if you get into the sportier drive mode in the Rivian or the conserve drive mode, which is the most efficient, then ride quality does drop down. The Rivian, of course, has an adaptive air suspension system. The Ford has a regular steel spring setup. Powering those electric motors are battery packs that are pretty similar in size. The Ford has a usable capacity of about 131 kilowatt hours, the Rivian just under 129. And that gives the Ford a highway range of 283 miles according to the EPA, the Rivian a highway range of 293. But if you use the conserve mode in the Rivian, you can easily get over 300 miles because it disables 2 of the electric motors, the ones in the rear. If you're worried about road trip range, which is logically what we think about when we're talking about range, unquestionably the Rivian will go further than the Ford. And the difference gets larger and larger the faster you go. Bear in mind that these EPA range numbers for the highway have an average speed of just under 50 miles an hour. If you're going 70 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour, or 80 miles an hour, the Rivian gets much, much more efficient because it's definitely much more aerodynamic than the Lightning. So if you're setting the cruise control to 75 and you're just going from point A to point B, expect maybe 250, 260 miles out of the Ford, expect just over 300 miles out of the Rivian. Charging the battery is definitely a bit different between these 2 vehicles. The onboard level 2 charger in the Ford is considerably faster, almost double at 19.2 kilowatts versus the 11.5 in the Rivian. Now, I was never able to use that with these 2 vehicles because I do not have the ability to support an 80 amp charge, and that is critically important. Installing the EVSE at home that will charge your Ford at 19.2 kilowatts is going to be pretty expensive compared to installing the average EVSE. A lot of folks out there are charging their EVs at around 6 to 7 kilowatts. So not everybody is even going to be charging their Rivian at its maximum speed. But if you want to get 0 to 100% faster at home, that is the way to do it, and the Ford is going to be doing a better job of it. At the DC fast charge station, the Rivian is going to charge a little bit faster, but both of these vehicles realistically are going to take nearly an hour to get from 10% to 80 or 90%, depending on exactly how full you want to fill your battery. The Rivian is a little bit faster, and Rivian has been more adept at issuing software updates to make the charging happen faster. Ford has been taking a more leisurely approach. The best way to describe the driving dynamics of these two vehicles out on the road is that the Rivian feels an awful lot like a Range Rover or a Grand Cherokee with the back cut off, basically a pickup truck Grand Cherokee. It feels more SUV-like, more crossover-like, thanks to the independent suspension, the air suspension, all that kind of stuff going on. The Lightning is quite simply the best riding half-ton truck in America. It also has a fully independent suspension, the big difference between this and a regular F-150, and that results in a rear suspension that is much smoother, much more compliant over broken pavement. It also is going to be better when it comes to handling, but it is still a half-ton truck, so it still tends to feel bigger and heavier and more isolated from the road than the Rivian. The Rivian's certainly more fun to drive. The Ford, it's more of a traditional half-ton truck that happens to be electric. When it comes to efficiency, the Rivian clearly wins the efficiency race here. Over the approximately 1,500 miles that we've had the Rivian and approximately 1,500 miles that we've had our own Lightning, not the Platinum that's in this video, but our own Lightning, the Rivian is about 30% more efficient. So you'll go about 30% further on the exact same amount of battery. And that doesn't really change too much whether you're towing a light load or just driving it daily. But there is a bit of a twist. The Rivian consumes considerably more power doing nothing. Some folks call this vampire load. There's some videos on the channel about that. Key thing to know is that if you walk away from the Rivian for about 2 weeks, you can expect the Rivian is going to consume about a quarter of its battery doing absolutely nothing. And that means that if you're going to go on a holiday for a month and a half, 2 months, something like that, you could come back to a Rivian that is completely dead. The Lightning, on the other hand, uses almost no power when it's turned off, and over that same 2-week window, it consumed essentially zero. It was still showing 100% battery capacity. Again, if you want to know more about that, there's some videos on the channel. So real-world efficiency, it's going to depend on how much you drive it every day and how much it just hangs out in your driveway. Perhaps the best way to describe these two vehicles is that the Lightning feels like an F-150 that just happens to be an electric truck, whereas the Rivian feels like what would happen if Jeep were to try and make a Grand Cherokee pickup truck, or Land Rover was going to try and make a Range Rover pickup truck. That's really what this feels like, and that's exactly the mission Rivian was going for, I think, because they said that in the process of developing the R1T, they benchmarked things like the Grand Cherokee and the Range Rover lineup from Land Rover. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section, and what would you pick if your own money were on the line. Hopefully this video has helped you out if you're trying to decide between these two trucks. Be sure and comment down there, hit the subscribe button, find me over at the other channels, and I'll see all of you next week.